Okay, so I'm back, and GGG decided to bless us with, well, I'm just gonna say simply, it's busted. This ascendancy is incredibly strong. I don't, I thought I had an idea about like the power levels that all the ascendancies were gonna be at, but if this stays in the game the way it is, I will honestly have a hard time convincing myself not to play this because this is pretty fun. Now, there is an archetype I'll show later in a different ascendancy that I think is cool as well, but this one's this one's kind of crazy. Uh, where do I even start? All of these nodes are good. So 100% of lightning damage converted to cold damage, your cold damage can shock. Now, this does not sound all that great. But something you need to realize is that Herald builds are extremely strong. And what this essentially does is it allows our Herald of Ice to proc Herald of Thunder, and allows our Herald of Thunder to proc Herald of Ice. If you've been playing POE 2, this will sound very familiar to you, and it's gonna blow up the entire screen. And it's just good. Like you could throw any build that's gonna do lightning or cold damage can get this chain started, and it's just gonna be really strong. Like you could throw this on anything. It's a shadow. Like you could run spells, you can run attacks, you could run Frostblades of Katabasis would work just fine with this. And then you're getting shock damage on your Frostblade attacks. In addition, you have screen wide clear. It's amazing. Next, we have within the Tempest, enemies you kill are shocked. Shocks you inflict are spread to other enemies. I'm just going to start ranking these. I can't rank these, man. I don't even know what to do. I'd just be drawing circles on the screen. All of these are so good, but sorry for the rabbit trail. But enemies you kill are shocked. Shocks you inflict spread to other enemies within 1.5 meters. Essentially, what this means is that all enemies in a pack, not a single boss, but all enemies in a pack are going to be shocked at all times, and the shock is going to be 15%. What this means is that you could run something like, what's the name of it? Impulsa, which hasn't been a meta item for a long time, so potentially it could be cheap depending on how this ascendancy plays out, and also get screen-wide explosions. So my advice here is that if you are picking one of these, need to go to the red marker. You're picking one of either this one or this one. You're picking one of these. And the reason I say that is because both of them are going to blow up the screen if you're playing your build correctly. So I don't think there's a need to have both of them. I think just one of them should be enough, but maybe that's something you can experiment with. Respecking an ascendancy point isn't the end of the world. And any build that can take advantage of one can probably be finagled a little bit to take advantage of the other. So no real opportunity cost there, just pick one of them. Next, we have 50% chance to freeze enemies for 1 second when they hit you. Enemies you freeze remain frozen for at least 1 second. So this one might sound weak on paper, but what this is going to do is this can enable something like a Heatshiver setup, something that Heatshiver struggles with sometimes. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up Heatshiver just so you all know what I'm talking about, just in case you've never seen the unique before. Has this line: gain 1% of cold damage is extra fire damage for each one chill effect on enemy, 30% of cold damage is extra fire damage against frozen enemies. So if we have an easy way of freezing an enemy to start Heatshiver, generally we can keep them frozen. And this is because Heatshiver builds will normally do some version of all damage can chill, and or all damage can freeze. And if we're not running a mechanic like all damage can freeze, we can still take advantage of this for that short burst of damage. And also, the enemies you freeze remain frozen for at least 1 second. Another thing that's doing is normally how freeze works is it has a threshold, and unless it reaches that minimum freeze duration threshold, the freeze does not trigger. So this can allow freeze to trigger when otherwise it wouldn't, because any freeze with a duration of less than, I forget forget how many seconds it is, or what the exact time of the freeze is. But any freeze with a duration less than that freeze is discarded. So if this makes all freezes 1 second, then it should pass the threshold, and then the enemy should be frozen. So that's another thing to consider. So even something like ice traps could be really strong with this, or I've already mentioned frost blades. Basically any cold skill. Even something like that you don't normally think about freezing, like Winter Orb, which is not a particularly strong skill at the moment, but has a really good clear, could be good here because it can just allow you to freeze enemies simpler. Next, we have Ghost of the Deep, and this is your leveling ascendancy node. This is the most nutty leveling node I have ever seen on an ascendancy. To give you an idea, people used to grab the Raider node. You have permanent onslaught, right? And people used to say, oh, it's so good while leveling, you can move quickly, blah, blah, blah. This is stronger onslaught, and you're just kind of getting it for free. It's onslaught that comes with 30% increased damage, right? It's nutty. It's almost as good as a permanent adrenaline. Like it's just very good. In addition, you're touched by tormented illegal fishermen, granting those stats might trigger Fairgrave's Tricorn, which I will bring up here. It says you can be touched by tormented spirits, but it's not showing the buff here, but you get a buff while Fairgrave's Tricorn's effect is active, and that buff could potentially be triggered by that. We don't know that for sure, but that's something we could look into. So potentially you level with Fairgrave's Tricorn and Ghost of the Deep, and you call it a day. And any build you want is going to benefit from Ghost of the Deep. You're going to go ham. Then we have the meme, but extremely powerful fishing nodes, which are 50% more cast speed while holding a fishing rod, and all hits are critical strikes while holding a fishing rod. Now, I say meme, but that doesn't mean these nodes are not powerful. They're extremely strong. First of all, I'll explain how you get a fishing rod in this game, because this is probably a lot of people's first exposure to what the fuck is a fishing rod. Well, turns out, if you wear a Fairgrave's Tricorn, and you are killing enemies, unique enemies have a chance of dropping a fishing rod. It could be a unique fishing rod, or it could be a regular fishing rod. And if you are wearing said fishing rod, which, by the way, don't normally have stats that are beneficial to builds at all, one node will give you all critical strikes are... all hits are critical strikes. What's so important about that is it will apply to spells and attacks, so that could be useful, and 50% more cast speed while holding a fishing rod. So this is more benefiting our spellcaster archetypes here. Please note that spells with a base critical chance of 0 can now potentially crit. For example, if you have all hits are critical strikes, and you have, what's the name of that skill? Herald of Ice. Herald of Ice normally cannot freeze enemies, right? But since it can crit, and it will crit 100% of the time if you have this node, it will self-proliferate. So this is also probably one of these nodes you only take one of. If you take this node, right, and you're using a fishing rod, you can self-proliferate your own Herald of Ice, and you should still blow up the entire screen just with Herald of Ice. So that's something you can think about. You'll need to scale cold damage and elemental damage somewhere on the tree, or use something like a Annihilating Light to increase the damage, but actually, wait, you can't use Annihilating Light on the fishing rod at the same time. Ignore me. Next, we have 30% to cold and lightning resistance, and critical strike chances increased by overcapped lightning res, and evasion rating is increased by overcapped cold resistance. So this is another really strong leveling node, right? Let me just put this, I'm going to group this together with Ghost of the Deep. These two are probably what you're going to consider leveling with, and then there's a third one we'll talk about leveling with. But basically, this is good for an evasion stacking build. Something you could consider doing is potentially like a Queen of the Forest build with this, and you will go extremely fast. If you have Queen of the Forest, your evasion ratings being increased by overcap cold resistance, you could easily get like an extra like theoretically you could get 30% cold resistance on every piece of gear, right? And so that's going to add up to like, I don't know, let's just say 150% increased evasion rating. Could be very impactful on an evasion stacker, and you could use Queen of the Forest or a number of mechanics or a replica Dreamfeather potentially, but that's not a league start build. But something along those lines to take advantage of that extra evasion rate. So something to think about. Sea legs, the critical strike chance is good, but since a lot of people are going to be baited by the fishing rod guaranteed crit, it might not end up being that useful, but nevertheless it's an option. Changing seasons is also going in the leveling ones. It can be strong even after leveling, but at least for the leveling process you probably want this as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to reduce the effective chill on you. So essentially this is 30% more action damage as long as you're taking damage from enemies. Now, this might be one of those things where we play it and we decide it's not that great, and the only reason I have that reservation is because Trickster builds traditionally, I say Trickster, I mean Shadow builds traditionally, run a lot of evasion rating. And if we're not getting hit because we're evading everything, we're not getting chilled, and if we're not getting chilled, then we're not getting increased action speed, right? So maybe this isn't going to be as practically useful as it sounds, but right now it sounds absolutely busted. So at least try this while leveling. Go Ghost of the Deep first because it will have higher uptime, then go Changing Seasons, and then go Sea Legs. That would be my recommendation to everyone when they're leveling this Ascendancy. And then you can look for a fishing rod, or you can potentially unspec one of those nodes to grab any of the 3 blow up the screen nodes that I mentioned earlier when you start your mapping process. And then lastly, we have Glacial Wave, which is enemies chilled by your hits lessen their damage dealt by half of chill effect, and enemies chilled by your hits have damage taken increased by chill effect. So basically what you're going to want to do here is scale chill effect as high as it can go. There's some nodes on the tree that say increased effective chill, and this synergizes really well with Heatshiver builds once again, and pretty much every build going Herald of Ice. It's a very ice-themed ascendancy. Yeah, I'm super excited for this ascendancy. I'm gonna league start this unless they release something that takes my eyes away from this ascendancy. But it's gonna be super strong for mapping. This is a super strong defensive node, both because chill already makes you more defensible, right? Because it slows things down, so they're less likely to hit you. But if I have, say, a chill effective 50, right, which isn't too unobtainable, it's possible, right? Their damage with hits are going to be lessened by 25%. And so 25% damage reduction on Ascendancy is very, very nice. You know, you just build Evasion, Spell Suppress, and an Energy Shield, probably run Ghost Stance as well, and you're just going to have you should have a pretty smooth mapping experience. I have no idea what skill I'm running with it yet, but this looks really fun. I'm excited to play it, and I hope we get more Ascendancies like this.